On December 30th, 2022, a bartender at the Palomina bar in La Guajira, Colombia, caught the attention of the patrons. Despite having a long beard and wearing a hat that partially covered his face, everyone immediately recognized him as the man whose pictures had been seen everywhere recently. This bartender seemed completely calm and hardly looked like a dangerous criminal. The police had been searching for this man for 3 months, reviewing hours of video footage and receiving tips from numerous witnesses. The search spanned 2,234 kilometers, or 150 hours of driving time across 15 cities, with witness statements gathered from Ecuador, Spain, and Mexico. The police conducted 28 interrogations with about 10 people contributing to the man's capture. After so much effort, the police could hardly believe they had finally found and would soon arrest the murderer of young Maria Belen. Would they be able to catch and imprison the feared criminal? Or would he escape again, leaving the crime unsolved? Maria Belen Bernal was born on March 14, 1988, in Quito, Ecuador. From a young age, she was passionate about law and known for always fighting for the justice of others. This passion led her to study law at the Central University, and being an excellent and very curious student, she soon earned her master's in procedural law from the Simon Bolivar University of Ana, and her master's in oral procedures from the Western California Law School. While studying, Maria worked as an administrative assistant at the Attorney General's office. Besides her studies and work, she had a small son named Isaac, whom her mother Elizabeth helped raise. All the while, Maria also cared for her cancer-stricken grandmother. All this shows Maria as an incredibly strong and determined woman. Her neighbors described her as very kind and generous, often providing legal assistance for free, for which she was highly respected. In 2017, Maria Belen married Police Lieutenant Herman Cesares. The newlyweds moved with Isaac to the Cancata area in the south of Quito. Maria joined the company Grow Criminal Defense, where she and 5 other women handled cases of abuse, gender-based violence, police defense, and child support. Maria literally lived to help people affected by abuse. She even set up a TikTok account to encourage people to report abuse. In one of her videos, Maria talked about a case where she was a victim of a paternal relative and reminded her followers that abuse should not be ignored. Maria was also an advocate for feminism, posting a picture on Facebook with the caption, "I was born to be free, not to be murdered." In 2021, when Maria was only 33 years old, she worked on the most high-profile case of her career, representing the family of Alejandra, last name, who died after being run over by a patrol officer of the Metropolitan Transportation Authority in Quito. Maria proved that the police officers were responsible for the accident, won the case, and earned the respect of many colleagues but also made enemies. In mid-2021, Maria made a public statement in one of her TikTok videos, naming 2 police officers she believed threatened her life and health. Just a few months later, something terrible happened. On September 11, 2022, Maria Belen went to the General Alberto Enriquez Sagala Police Academy in the northern sector of Quito. She arrived at 12:45 a.m. in her red car. Although the visitor schedule was not open, she was allowed to enter as the lieutenant's wife. After checking in, she drove to the building with the officer's dormitory, which took only 5 minutes. She parked and went to her husband's room, hoping he would be alone as they had an important conversation to have. When she entered and confronted her husband, she immediately noticed a conspicuous mark on his neck, undoubtedly from another woman, meaning Herman was cheating on her. A fierce argument ensued, with screams and blows heard for a long time. One of the nearby cadets became suspicious and decided to report everything to the police chief, only to receive a sharp response that it was better not to interfere in the couple's dispute. Eventually, it became quiet, and everyone thought the argument was over. However, Maria's departure from the building was not registered, and no one heard from her again. On Monday, September 13th, Herman went to the National Police Directorate for the investigation of deaths, disappearances, kidnappings, and extortion to report his wife's disappearance, as no one in the family had heard from her for 2 days. General Alan Luna, the head of the police logistics department, took over the case and asked Herman to leave, assuring him that everything would be done to find the missing woman. The next day, investigators paid an unexpected visit to Herman at the police academy, asking for permission to search his room. This angered the man, and he refused the search, but he soon agreed to cooperate and appeared at the prosecutor's office to describe the day he last saw his wife. Herman Cesares said that after a tense argument, they got into Maria's car together, but argued again on the way home, and Maria got out of the car on Simon Boulevard Avenue to take a taxi. At the end of his statement, the man arrogantly expressed hope that the police would believe his wife had disappeared. Herman finished his statement at 2:40 p.m. and did not leave the police station until 2:45 a.m. The police officers had no reason to detain him, but felt something was amiss. They checked his statements and placed Cesares under surveillance before releasing him. Immediately afterward, Herman met his parents and sister outside the prosecutor's office, got on his BMW motorcycle, and disappeared into the night. Early in the morning, police visited Cesares' sister and reported they had received a search warrant and had begun the search. They found nothing incriminating except that the motorcycle Herman had ridden a few hours earlier was missing from the garage. This allowed the police to set up surveillance on the man, but it was too late as the husband and main suspect in Maria Bellin's disappearance had gone into hiding. Due to Cesares' actions, the police immediately removed the names of the officers Maria had mentioned in her TikTok video from the list of suspects. Everything seemed to point to Cesares' guilt, so the investigators focused on proving this theory. They interviewed cadets who were in the building when Maria Bellin disappeared, and one revealed that the woman had not been invited to the party that evening. After suddenly appearing at her husband's door at night, they locked themselves in, and screams and blows were heard for a long time. An hour later, witnesses saw Herman Cesares leaving the room with a bundle of blankets. Other witnesses said they saw the man loading the bundle into his wife's car and driving off in an unknown direction. Police reports also indicated that the man left the building through the back door, not the front. The whole situation was very suspicious and needed to be investigated. Furthermore, there was information that between 4:30 and 5 a.m., a few hours after the argument, more screams were heard from Herman's room, this time of an intimate nature. Based on witness statements, the police obtained a search warrant for the lieutenant's room. The search revealed empty beer bottles, bloodstains on the mattress, and strange handprints on the wall. Maria's car, eventually found outside her and her husband's home, was also examined with luminol fluid. The analysis revealed that the entire car was smeared with blood, and the blood was sent for DNA testing and compared to Maria's mother's DNA. Unfortunately, the result was positive, leaving no doubt that Maria was dead. General Major of the National Police, Fausto Salinas, ordered Herman Cesares' dismissal from the police force, while the Minister of the Interior and the Police Academy's administration filed a complaint to involve him in the investigation and ensure Herman received the harshest punishment. Shortly after, a search warrant and arrest warrant for Herman as a suspect in his wife's disappearance were officially issued. His picture was broadcast nationwide in all news programs alongside photos of Bellin, asking the public to contact the police if they knew anything about the girl's whereabouts. Maria's mother, Elizabeth, refused to believe her daughter was dead until the body was found. So she led the search and scoured the area where Maria was last seen. Elizabeth gained the support of several community organizations and together advocated for a better search for the missing person to speed up the process and finally find out what had happened. Maria's son Isaac was not left out either. The teenager set up a Twitter account to ask for help finding his mother, stating that his stepfather was the last person to see her alive and that the police would offer a $20,000 reward for information leading to his capture. In his post, Isaac wrote clear words directly addressed to Herman, promising the man they would find him. Several days of intensive searching brought results, and on September 21st, an event occurred that changed everything. Maria Bellin's body was found only 10 minutes from the police academy in a ravine on the hill of San Castilla. Maria was identified by the clothing she wore on the day of her disappearance and her tattoos. The forensic examination revealed the cause of death was asphyxiation. Maria had been strangled with a belt. Additionally, she suffered severe head injuries, with a large hematoma on the right side of her face, ear, and back of her head, and another hematoma on the other side under her hair that led to brain bleeding. However, there were no other serious injuries on her body, neither in the chest, abdomen, pelvis, back, or arms. This fact contradicted the witnesses' statements that Herman had wrapped his wife's body in a blanket and dragged it to the car. The man was unable to carry her the entire way, and if he had dragged her over the ground, more injuries would have been found on her body. Investigators suspected the girl's body was most likely dragged by two people holding her arms and legs to avoid further injuries. It was also noteworthy that although the body was discovered several days after her disappearance, it showed little decomposition and did not have the characteristic strong odor. It appeared that the body had been buried on San Castilla Hill shortly before its discovery. This reinforced the certainty that Herman did not act alone, as the man would not have been able to hide the body for so long by himself. Investigators suspected he had help from someone at the police academy. The first suspect was Cadet Jocelyn Sanchez, who was in the next room when the fight between Maria and Herman broke out. The prosecutor's office immediately issued an arrest warrant for her, and the woman did not hesitate to share her version of the events of that terrible night. On Saturday, September 10th, Jocelyn attended a party organized by her colleagues. There she met a completely drunk Herman, who flirted extensively with her, making her uncomfortable. Jocelyn could not reject him as he held a higher position, and she feared he would retaliate if she turned him down. At some point, the lieutenant asked her to accompany him to his room, and she obeyed as if it were an order. In his room, Herman received a call that his wife had come to see him and that he should talk to her, as she was very angry. Jocelyn stayed in her room, swearing she never saw Maria Bellin. She claimed she had not slept for 21 hours due to her security duties and fell into a deep sleep, not hearing the fight noises or Maria's cries for help. If she had witnessed the crime, she said she would have intervened for the victim, not as a police officer, but as a woman. Later, however, more compromising evidence was found against Jocelyn. Her lawyer handed investigators a video recording where the girl confessed to having had intercourse with Herman in the early morning hours after Maria's disappearance. After this revelation, Jocelyn tried to justify herself, claiming the confession was illegally recorded and her words were edited. She also filed a complaint against her lawyer, demanding his disbarment for violating a confidentiality agreement. It turned out that the video was not the only evidence that Jocelyn knew about the crime. Her friend provided the police with their WhatsApp correspondence, where Jocelyn talked about a fight between Herman and Maria. A few days after this conversation and the discovery of the body, Jocelyn asked her friend to delete the correspondence. Through witness interviews and evidence collection, the prosecutor's office was able to gather at least 35 strong pieces of evidence that Jocelyn was somehow involved in Maria Bellin's disappearance. This evidence made it possible to charge the girl with complicity. The case resonated widely with the public as the police officers were the main suspects. Shortly after the information about Jocelyn's arrest was published, the media and many community organizations began publicly accusing the police academy of the crime. When Maria's mother learned of the discovery of her daughter's body, she turned directly to the country's president, Guillermo Lasso, via a Twitter account to seek justice for Maria. In her appeal, Elizabeth emphasized that the perpetrators were members of the police academy and that the main suspect was still at large. Dozens of civil society organizations, including feminist groups, held demonstrations across the country to hold the Ecuadorian National Police accountable. In the public eye, the murder was seen as a state crime since it was committed at a police facility by on-duty police officers. Maria's funeral took place on Thursday, September 22nd, at Mount Olive in Coma Santa. At the same time, a public meeting was held at the Central University of Ecuador in Quito, where concerned people advocated for justice for the victim. Meanwhile, government authorities responded to the accusations against them, stating Herman's act was an isolated case that had damaged the institution's reputation. Interior Minister Patricio Carrillo gave a harsh statement on a TV show. expressing regret over the crime and stating it was an ordinary crime committed by an ordinary person. This statement caused great public outrage, shaking the foundations of the government system. General Freddy Goas, the National Director of Criminal Police Investigations, and General Giovanni Panze, the National Director of Civil Security and Public Order, were suspended. It is unclear why these two generals were suspended, but it seemed the president was trying to defuse the situation. President Guillermo Lasso also publicly announced that he had given Police Major Fausto Lenas a week to achieve final results in capturing Lieutenant Cesares, and demanded the resignation of Patricio Carrillo due to his controversial statements. Lasso also publicly apologized, stating that as president, he should not have allowed such an outrageous crime, especially in an institution that trains police officers whose job is to protect citizens. Additionally, he ordered the search for the perpetrator to be intensified. As Herman remained at large, public distrust of the police grew daily. Just when it seemed the man had escaped justice, witnesses spotted him in Tulcan, a border town in northern Ecuador, where the Rumichaca Bridge connects the country with Colombia. There, Herman spent several hours at the foot of a mountain, waiting for others who wanted to cross the border. On September 15th, Herman was spotted on surveillance cameras entering the western tunnel at Villa Medellin Santa Fe in Antioquia. He was traveling without his suitcases and walking alone. On September 23rd, the police recorded a call made to Herman's phone. 6 days later, Ecuadorian authorities met with Colombian police to search for the perpetrator. On November 19th, they investigated the area around Lago Ajiro mentioned in Herman's phone calls. On December 7th, the Ecuadorian police sent requests to Interpol's Fugitive Task Force and the Colombian Technical Investigation Unit. On December 30th, Herman's location was discovered. Witnesses identified him as an employee at a bar in Palomina. Herman was unrecognizable, now sporting a long beard and wearing a hat that covered half his face. Nevertheless, he stood out when he thanked customers for their tips in an Ecuadorian dialect. These customers decided to report their suspicion to the police, and Herman was arrested the same day. He did not resist arrest, and the paperwork for his return to Ecuador was quickly completed. Although Herman had not yet testified and the investigation was not yet concluded, the Ecuadorian president immediately declared that the perpetrator would be punished to the fullest extent of the law. On the night of September 11th, under the influence of alcohol, Herman received more than 10 calls from his wife. When he finally answered, Maria angrily told him she was coming to see him for a serious conversation. When Maria entered the room and saw the marks on Herman's neck, she directly asked if he was cheating on her. Herman did not hide, and even happily admitted that he had been unfaithful for 5 years. A heated argument ensued, with both of them yelling, and at some point, Herman started beating Maria. The woman called for help about 10 times, but no one came to her aid. To silence Maria, Herman used judo techniques on her and eventually strangled her in a fit of rage. By 1 a.m., Herman realized Maria was dead. He wrapped her body in a blanket and carried her to the car, leaving the body in the trunk. The next day, he acted as if nothing had happened, continuing his routine and attempting to clean the crime scene in his spare time. In the evening, around 7:30 p.m., he drove away in Maria's car, arousing no suspicion as it appeared he was just doing his job. He went to Casitawa Hill, dug a hole, and buried the body. Herman maintained that he acted alone, without help from anyone. On Monday following the crime, Herman went to work as usual until he received a call from his mother-in-law, inquiring about Maria's whereabouts. Herman told her that Maria had walked away in an unknown direction after their argument, and he had not heard from her since. Elizabeth insisted he file a missing person report, which Herman hesitated to do for several hours, but eventually did, hoping to divert suspicion from himself. After confessing to what happened on the night of the crime, Herman exercised his right to remain silent, refusing to answer any more questions from his lawyers, believing his punishment was inevitable. The trial was delayed as new evidence continued to surface. Maria Bellin's phone recording was discovered, where she had recorded her screams and pleas for help on a dictaphone, stating that she was going to be killed, which she ultimately was. This recording was kept confidential, and significantly influenced Jocelyn's acquittal, proving she was not present at the scene during the crime. Although it is still unclear how much Jocelyn knew about the events, she was eventually released from custody. Upon her release, she gave a speech thanking the women who supported her during her imprisonment. At the same moment, Elizabeth interrupted, stating that Jocelyn must feel guilty for Maria's death for the rest of her life. Elizabeth accused her of having a sexual relationship with Herman on the day of the crime and failing to respond to Maria's cries for help. It is currently believed that 3 people were involved in Maria Bellin's death: Herman, Jocelyn Sanchez, and Police Lieutenant Alfonso Cacho. The latter was charged for failing to act during the crime despite being in the same building and hearing the screams. Herman is the only one serving his sentence at the Laroque prison. His lawyers argue that he should be convicted of manslaughter rather than femicide, claiming he acted under the influence of alcohol. Despite the conviction of these 3 individuals, the entire police force was involved in the incident, as none intervened during the crime. The investigation phase concluded on January 15th, with the prosecutor's office expected to request a hearing to determine if all those involved will be charged. Ecuadorians continue to follow the case closely, with thousands of women hoping that Maria's murderer will receive the harshest punishment, and the case will be classified as femicide. Society also hopes that this case will not only impact domestic violence prevention, but also the actions of law enforcement agencies, emphasizing that their role is to protect people, not let them die.
Money can solve some problems, but of course it cannot help against a real monster, although it can cover him up. Elissa Claps was born on January 21, 1977 in the city of Potenza in Italy. This small town with just under 70,000 inhabitants bore the nickname Vertical. It consisted of highs and lows and lay on the side of a hill. Her mother was a financial officer and her father worked as an employee in a tobacco shop. Elissa was the 3rd child in the family. The first were siblings named Gilda and Luciana. The Claps were a very religious family. Every Sunday they attended church. Elissa was described as a friendly and loving girl. Elissa always saw only the good in people, which made her seem a little naive. Nevertheless, her kindness and compassion attracted people. She had many friends and easily got along with new acquaintances. At the time of the described events in September 1993, the 16-year-old Elissa was attending high school and was deciding about her future plans for life at that time. She dreamed of becoming a doctor. Therefore, she wanted to study at a medical university after her training and go to Africa as a volunteer with doctors. On September 12, 1993, she wanted to participate in a family celebration at the country house. To prepare everything, Elissa's parents and one of her brothers left the city early in the morning. Gilda was supposed to arrive in the late afternoon. As on any other Sunday, Elissa also wanted to go to church with her friend named Ileana. The friend should also go to lunch with Elissa's family. Elissa woke up early and left the house at 11:30 a.m. to go to the Church of Santissima Trinita, which was centrally located in the city. Her brother was waiting for the return of his sister around this time when the doorbell rang. The young man thought his sister had returned from church, but instead of her, her friend Ileana stood at the door. She said they had been together in church, but when they came out, a large crowd passed by and the girls lost sight of each other. She admitted that she could not find her friend and therefore decided to go to her house hoping she had already returned. These words sounded unconvincing from the beginning because in this small town it was difficult to lose someone out of sight. When her brother pointed out these inconsistencies, Ileana changed her story. She admitted that Elissa wanted to meet with a friend. The students should come home together after the service. However, the friend did not manage to meet Elissa at the agreed time. According to Ileana, the mysterious man was Danilo Restivo. Danilo Restivo was born on April 3, 1972 in Rizza, a small town in Sicily. In the mid-1980s, he and his family moved to Potenza when his father found a position as director of the city library. Since it was a respected position, the man decided to move with his entire family to the new location. The boy was described as strange. During his school years, for example, he spied on girls in the toilet. He even kept a diary in which he recorded everything he saw this way. His cousin Sonia, 2 years younger than him, described him as introverted and difficult to get along with peers, especially girls. According to her, Danilo tried every time they came home at the same time to lure her to a certain place under various pretexts. The girl refused, but one day she was curious and wanted to see what Danilo told her about. However, she did not want to go alone and turned to her cousin Angelo, who was 11 years old at the time, to accompany her. When the children arrived at the agreed time and place, Danilo informed them that he needed to blindfold their eyes and tie their wrists so that they could enter the secret place. Both agreed to do so. Danilo went ahead and led them to a place. The young man sat the children on chairs and began to grope them. Sonia took off the blindfold and saw how Danilo put on gloves, then grabbed a knife, threw Angelo's head back and stabbed him. The girl had time to react and the boy immediately ran away. Angelo was injured and bled. Sonia helped him and the children ran away together. Danilo pursued them and called after them not to tell anyone what had happened. Angelo lost a lot of blood when he was taken to the hospital. It turned out that the knife had only narrowly missed his main artery by a few millimeters. The boy was indeed on the edge of death and severely injured. Naturally, the children told the adults what had happened because it was obvious that the wound had not been caused by an accident, as Danilo tried to claim. A police report was filed against the juvenile offender. Afterwards, Danilo's father appeared at the doorstep of Angelo's family, begging with tears in his eyes to withdraw the statement to the police. The man even promised to pay money for it. He said he knew about his son's psychological problems and would ensure he received the necessary treatment. Since the father was a respected man in town, they accepted his offer. Angelo's family finally took the money and withdrew the complaint. Unfortunately, the man did not keep his promise and did not send his son for treatment, but prevented it to protect his reputation. In this way, the life of the juvenile criminal continued. In every phase, he had difficulties integrating into society and resisted greatly. The boy changed several educational institutions, but could never truly realize himself anywhere. After changing 3 schools, his father finally managed to enroll him at a private college where the teenager could obtain a high school diploma. This happened when he was 18 years old. Afterwards, Danilo joined military service but was quickly discharged. The young man wet the bed and behaved inappropriately. Such turns in his life did not stop. He continued his miserable existence under the wings of his wealthy father with connections. In the months before his disappearance, he was known for his obsessive and rude behavior toward girls. His father never did anything about his son's treatment, it only got worse. At that time, he had contact simultaneously with 3 girls from his neighborhood. He looked at all of them, but with each time he wanted more. He got their phone numbers and started calling them. Later, he sometimes played classical music into the receivers. According to the girls' statements, it sounded like a horror film. Then the man began sending letters with obscene motives and drawings. The whole thing began to escalate. The man started sending creepy gifts such as a timer with broken wires and a message saying boom. Unfortunately, Alyssa Claps was on this list too. Danilo even began to walk across her path on the street. He knew where and at what time she would pass by, so he could suddenly appear everywhere and behave obsessively. Danilo began asking her for a date. Alyssa had no feelings for the man. His presence even made her nervous. Nevertheless, out of pity, she repeatedly agreed to these meetings, communicated with him, but tried to maintain distance. Gilda said that he himself had witnessed the obsessive behavior of his inappropriate neighbor one day, when the siblings were walking along the slope. Danilo began calling the girl to an unknown place and was very insistent, grabbing her arm and trying to pull her with him. Alyssa pressed her brother's hand so hard that he realized he should not let her go with this man. Finally, Gilda managed to drive away the insistent suitor. Her brother was surprised by his sister's behavior because he had never seen her so frightened. However, she did not go into details of the communication with this young man. When Alyssa's friend Ileana told Gilda with whom she wanted to meet that morning in church, namely Danilo, the brother became immediately concerned. According to the girl's statement, Alyssa had finally found the strength to refuse Danilo's advances at that time. This meeting should have been the last one. The student agreed anew in the hope that the courtship would stop afterwards, but she was gravely mistaken. Afterwards, Gilda called Danilo's house. The call was answered by Danilo's father, Mr. Maurizio, who did not want to give the phone to his son. Gilda explained to him the seriousness of the situation. He said that his sister was supposed to meet Danilo but had not come home since then, and they were worried about where she was. The father handed the phone to his son, who admitted that he had indeed seen Alyssa in church. According to Danilo, she complained about the young man who had harassed her when she came to this meeting. Then she left and he stayed to pray and never saw her again. After these words, the father took the receiver and abruptly dismissed Gilda. The missing girl's brother noticed what was going on, called the family, and told them what had happened. Everyone immediately returned home to look for Alyssa. Alyssa's other brother, Luciana, could not take it anymore and decided to go to Danilo Restivo's house to speak with him face to face. At the doorstep, the young man was once again met by Mr. Maurizio, who refused to open the door. Thereupon, Luciana threatened to break down the door. Finally, the strange man himself came downstairs and came out. He was very excited, literally sweating with excitement, and began stammering and visibly nervously repeating the story he had told Gilda on the phone. A few minutes later, Mr. Maurizio ended the conversation with his neighbor, just as he had done during the telephone conversation before. The missing girl's brothers went home and then immediately decided to go in the direction of the church where the sister had gone. They wanted to inspect the place where the girl was supposed to meet Danilo. In their opinion, she disappeared approximately at this location. Here the young men examined the church and wanted to go to the upper secret room whose door was locked. However, the priest denied them access. The Claps family decided to go to the police and report the girl's disappearance. From the beginning, they pointed to Danilo, whom they suspected was involved in the incident. Unfortunately, the police officers did not take the disappearance of the student seriously. Only 24 hours later did they file a report and decide to go immediately to Restivo's house to talk to the disturbed young man. Like everyone else, they were confronted by Mr. Maurizio. The man told them that his son had left Potenza towards Naples and would return within a day. One more day later, police officers arrived at the city's bus station to pick up Danilo from Naples and talk to him. However, he was not there. As it later turned out, the young man's father stopped the moving bus before it entered the city and picked up his son. The investigators went to his house to talk to the suspect. He was asked which shoes the friend had worn on the day of the incident. He answered sneakers and showed a shoe soaked in bleach, which seemed suspicious. In the evening, Mauro, Danilo, and the investigators went to the police station to question the young man about Alyssa's disappearance. He made contradictory statements and was visibly nervous. Furthermore, the investigators discovered a deep-cut wound on his arm. Danilo explained this as an accident. He had supposedly fallen on the street while descending a staircase and collided with a stranger's metal object. Because of the deep wound, he began to bleed heavily, soiling his clothes. Danilo was never able to show the spot in the city wherever he took police officers to prove his statements. There was no trace of blood. Moreover, his story changed repeatedly during conversations with the police officers. All of this seemed very suspicious. According to his sister Anna, her brother came home covered in blood on the afternoon Alyssa disappeared. She saw that he was traumatized and had to take him to the hospital where the doctors stitched him up. Despite the suspect young man's claim, the police immediately determined that the injury had been caused by a knife. As it turned out, nobody had seen Danilo between 11:30 a.m. and 1 p.m. on that day, and there was no one who could confirm his statements. Anna said that when he came home, not only his jacket but also his shirt and jeans were stained with blood. According to the description, it was obvious that there was too much blood for an accidental cut wound on his arm. At this point, all the clothing items had already been thoroughly washed. In the family's apartment, they insisted that they needed these objects for investigation. The investigator explained that they could exonerate the man this way, but Danilo's family opposed. The policeman even turned to the chief public prosecutor responsible for investigating Alyssa's disappearance. Despite a justified suspicion, the arrest warrant was rejected. The prosecutor even ignored the fact that Danilo had previously been involved in a case of suspicion. Also, he was clearly the last person who had seen the missing girl alive. Witnesses had seen him with Alyssa in the church, but none of them had seen the girl leave the church. When they searched Alyssa's diary, they found a torn-out page. It seemed as if she or someone else had tried to conceal a secret in this way. The situation only moved forward on October 5 of the year when television broadcasted live about the girl's disappearance and the main suspect Danilo. A woman called in who did not want to give her name but said she believed Danilo was really involved in the disappearance. She told them that he had a fetish for women's hair. He even created a strange collection and kept strands framed in his room. To collect these samples, he often lingered near hair salons. Naturally, the local workers knew about him and even jokingly called him the barber. After the press conference, several women contacted the police who recognized Danilo and confirmed that he had discreetly cut their hair in public transportation, on the street, and in hair salons. The police understood that they were dealing with an obsessive fetishist with distinctly inappropriate behavior and compulsive personality traits. He could have been a sexual deviant, which further increased the authorities' suspicion. The women who approached the police told many things about the young man's behavior. Especially, the police learned that he harassed his female neighbors. Back then, he was perceived by his environment as a local fool. They considered him harmless and did not suspect that behind all this was a real monster. His father insisted that his son had never tried to harm others. Of course, he was clever regarding the details of the story. Although most were convinced of Danilo's involvement in the disappearance, there were followers who believed that Alyssa simply ran away from home. The strongest denial came from Alyssa's father. He had a very warm relationship with his daughter and was aware from the start that he was not destined to see her alive again. In parallel, the Claps family followed how the events surrounding Danilo developed. On March 7, 1995, he was accused of making false statements about Alyssa's disappearance. By this time, the middlemen had succeeded in proving that he had lied both about the reasons for the meeting with the girl and about the injury on his arm and most other things he told. Alyssa's best friend Ileana evaded answers when the prosecutor cornered her during the hearing. The girl said, "I am afraid that what happened to Alyssa might happen to me too." She seemed to know more than she said. Nayla was sentenced to prison for perjury. Part of his sentence was served as a civilian worker in the local church. The same church the likely victim attended on Sundays and from which she never returned. It seemed there was a chance when the other girls who had become victims of stalking reported him to the police. Unfortunately, the result of these hearings was insignificant, a small fine for harassment of girls. Given his father's wealth, Danilo did not even feel this penalty. All this time, the Claps family waited for the results of the investigative work in the hope that they would find their daughter and finally punish the perpetrator with dignity. Unfortunately, it seemed the case was not progressing. This changed only in 1999 when the police approached a mafioso. He began cooperating with the investigation, which even advanced Alyssa's case. He could not say anything about the girl, but he exposed the criminal activities of the chief public prosecutor who prohibited the seizure of Danilo's clothes. This prosecutor was the one who had revoked the arrest warrant. As it turned out, he had received a large sum of money from Mr. Maurizio, thereby influencing and even stopping the investigations. The mafioso was eventually charged with slander. His words, however, helped draw a new investigative team's attention to Alyssa Clapp's disappearance. Unfortunately, they had to start the investigation from scratch. The police officers first obtained a search warrant and came to the house of the alleged perpetrator. In the man's room, they found strange things. In particular, they found a whole box full of photos of people with pronounced physical disabilities. Danilo claimed these were his ex-girlfriends, but this turned out to be a lie. He deliberately chose one-legged and one-armed women who could behave well and photographed them. As it turned out, he liked mutilated female bodies. Next, the investigators went to the church they also wanted to search. The police tried to open the exact door the local priest had never opened for the Claps brothers. The priest had meanwhile closed the church for all parishioners and had traveled to Fughi to take a thermal bath. His name was Don Dominic Sabbia, a man who always reacted evasively to Alyssa's story while downplaying everything. Later it turned out that Don Dominica was a close friend of Danilo's family. He even accompanied his father when he met with the parents of the victim Angel and helped pressure them not to make a statement to the police. After Danilo served his sentence for the false statement, he left Potenza and traveled through Europe. Wherever he stayed, his insane nature always followed him. In all cities where he stayed, women were strangely harassed and attempts were made to cut their hair. Occasionally, he returned to his parents and each time behaved very reservedly. At this time, Gilda created a website he used to continue drawing attention to his sister's disappearance. Unexpectedly, he received a letter signed with Alyssa. The message was written in her name and stated that she had voluntarily run away from home and was currently in Brazil. She asked him not to look for her. Of course, the brother recognized that the letter was forged, so he set out to search for the sender's address. He was not very surprised when the search revealed Danilo, who turned out to be the sender of the letter. Thus, the suspicion against him was further reinforced. Even after that, the situation did not progress until November 12, 2002. The following event occurred in the United Kingdom in the city of Bournemouth. A 48-year-old single mother named Heather Barnett lived with her schoolgirl daughters. When the two girls came home that day, their mother did not greet them as usual. In the bathroom, the children discovered the woman's corpse lying in a pool of blood. It was a gruesome sight that shocked the girls. The mother had been bludgeoned with a hammer and her throat had been slit. Her breast was cut off and lay next to her head. A strand of hair that did not belong to the woman was stuck in her right hand, and under her left arm was something from her own hair. It is assumed that Heather was attacked shortly after returning home from school in the morning. When the police began investigating the murder, the suspicious neighbors caught their attention rather quickly. Directly opposite the dead woman's door lived a couple. The woman was named F.A. Masson and the man was the already known Danilo. Danilo met F.A. over the internet and moved to Great Britain to start a new life. They married and he adopted her 2 children from a previous marriage. The deceased Heather worked from home. A seamstress visited her allegedly to discuss sewing curtains. He was the first to be on site when he returned home with his companion and the children raised the alarm. The man comforted the girls. Police officers took him in for questioning. Danilo presented a bus ticket with a time stamp to support his alibi that he was attending a computer course at the time of the murder. They believed him and let him go home. Danilo gave the impression of an awkward man who would leave many footprints, while the perpetrator left only a few footprints at the crime scene. Luminol tests revealed a chain of bloody shoe prints that abruptly ended. This indicates that the murderer changed his shoes before leaving the crime scene. Later, it turned out that Danilo had cleaned his sneakers with bleach, as he had done after Alyssa's disappearance. The daughters of the victim said that their mother had lost her keys after Danilo's next visit before the murder, but had not had time to change the locks. Now it was clear why he visited her so often. He had inspected the future crime scene and stolen the keys to gain access to the house. The police began following the suspect and tapping his calls to gather evidence against him. When Danilo was secretly filmed with a camera, he pursued single women. The surveillance team was concerned and decided to approach him and search him. Danilo wore suspicious waterproof trousers. In his car, the police found spare clothing, a butcher knife, a balaclava, and gloves. It was the perfect criminal equipment that looked very suspicious. The police searched his apartment and found strands of hair on the cleaned sneakers he wore on the day of the murder. They found small bloodstains, but due to the bleach, they could not be identified. A DNA test showed that a bloody towel left at the crime scene contained Danilo's samples. He claimed to have left it behind during a visit to the house beforehand. Previously, contacts were made from Italy and learned that Danilo was suspected in the case of Alyssa's disappearance. Everyone believed he had killed her. Danilo was charged with Heather's murder. On March 17, 2010, 17 years after Alyssa's disappearance, her mummified remains were discovered by a maintenance team on the attic of the church in Potenza. Alongside Sergi's glasses, shoes, the girl's clothing, and strands of hair from other persons, her bra was also found. It was cut open, her breasts were cut off, and her jeans were unbuttoned. The rape victim and her family believed that the priest Don Domenico had intentionally hidden the body and knew where it lay. For years, he never allowed an inspection behind the locked door of the church. After the discovery of the corpse, the church was closed. The preliminary forensic examination showed that Alyssa had been stabbed about 10 times with a sharp object, probably a knife or scissors. During an examination of the church attic, fingerprints and DNA traces were found that belonged to Danilo as well as to another man, presumably the priest Don Dominic. On March 9, 2011, Eliza Capps was buried. Danilo was imprisoned in England in the meantime. He was accused of murdering Heather Barnett, and evidence was gathered against him. On June 30, 2011, Danilo was sentenced to life imprisonment by a court in Winchester for Barnett's murder. In November 2012, the British Court of Appeal reduced the sentence to 40 years in prison. On November 8, 2011, a fast-track trial began in Italy for Alyssa's murder. Everything happened without the accused, who refused to participate via video link. At this time, the proceedings in Great Britain were still pending, which is why the extradition of the perpetrator was refused. For the reconstruction carried out by the public prosecutor's office, it was shown that Danilo had arranged to meet Alyssa in the church on the morning of this fateful day. He initially had dirty intentions with the girl. Alyssa caught wind of it, tried to flee, and hid in the attic of the church. The young man found her and hit her multiple times from behind. The girl tried to defend herself but could not. He raped and killed her. As irrefutable proof of his involvement, the prosecution presented the DNA samples from bloodstains on the murdered woman's clothing that matched Danilo's DNA. It is known that the suspect was injured on his arm that day, not by chance but during a struggle, and left a blood imprint on Alyssa's clothing. The Italian public prosecutor requested the maximum sentence of 30 years in prison. On November 11, the court largely approved the request of the public prosecutor and sentenced the perpetrator to pay €700,000 to the Claps family. The verdict was subsequently confirmed in the main trial, which took place in the presence of Danilo. The perpetrator is currently in prison in the United Kingdom, where he has been serving a 40-year sentence since 2011 for the murder of Heather Barnett. In 2051, after completing his sentence in the United Kingdom, he will be extradited to Italy and imprisoned there for another 30 years for the murder of Alyssa. But even after that, the case is not concluded as numerous allegations against the church and its responsible individuals must be addressed, as well as against those who discovered Alyssa's remains and apparently concealed them for a long time. The corpse had previously been found by the priest. He claimed he did not immediately tell anyone because the archbishop was busy that day, and the next day he forgot about the matter. He remembered only much later despite the protest of the Claps family. Eventually, all charges against the church were dropped, which was particularly painful for Alyssa's relatives. They were outraged by the commemorative plaque honoring Don Dominic that was attached to the church. They believed he had covered up for the perpetrator and hidden the corpse for all those years. Despite all objections, the church was reopened in early November 2023 and the first service was held. Relatives of Danilo's British victim criticized the Italian police investigation and pointed out that Heather would still be alive if Alyssa's corpse had been found earlier and the perpetrator had been sent to prison. They believe that the impunity encouraged the perpetrator to commit further crimes. Some believe he committed a ritual murder. Eliza was killed on September 12, 1993, and Heather on November 12, 2002. It appears suspicious that he attacked his victims on the 12th of the respective month and left a strand of hair near their corpses. There are speculations that Danilo may have had many more victims. The lawyers of the petty criminal Amr Ben Git, who was convicted of the murder of the Korean woman Chono Asin in Bournemouth, hinted that Danilo may have committed this crime too. He was living in the area at the time. The manner of the crime and even the knife matched. A lock of hair was found next to the corpse. The Korean woman was murdered in 2002 on the 12th Street. However, there is no evidence linking him to the crime, so Danilo was not charged in this case. It is suspected that he was involved in attacks on women in Italy, France, and the United Kingdom during the time he lived there. For example, his involvement in the disappearance of Erika Arman in Italy is seriously considered. She disappeared without a trace on April 20, 2003. The boyfriend and her mother waited for her at a restaurant for Easter dinner, but she did not come. After Danilo's arrest, search queries with her name were found on his computer. He actively followed the investigations in this case, which seems suspicious. Criminals often do this with Erika's case. Erika's corpse has not been found to this day, and no one has been charged in this case. Thank you for watching and take care of yourself. Charlene Elizabeth Caroline Downs was born on March 25, 1989, in the West Midlands region in the west of England. She lived there until she was 10 years old when her parents, Karen and Robert Downs, better known as Bob Downs, decided to move to Blackpool, a coastal town in the northwest of the country. Besides Charlene, her parents had 3 other children. Her younger brother was named Robert after her father, and her 2 older sisters were named Emma and Rebecca, who was generally just called Becky. Charlene attended St. George's College, which is equivalent to a high school with academy status. Despite her intelligence and scholarship, her school years were not easy. Charlene was described by her parents and friends as a cheerful, friendly, and attentive girl who had many acquaintances. However, she was also known for her rebellious nature and often got into trouble both at home and at school. It is known that in October 2003, she was even suspended from school for a short time. According to some reports, she led an, in the truest sense of the word, extreme lifestyle at that time and frequently spent time in the central promenade area of Blackpool, where, to put it mildly, strange people lived. However, 14-year-old Charlene seemed unaware of the dangers that threatened her there. Saturday, November 1, 2003, began for Charlene like a normal day off. She had breakfast with her family and then went to a friend's house. Around noon, she returned home, but at 5 p.m. she wanted to go out again to take a walk with her older sister Becky. The two girls went into town around 6:30 p.m. According to Becky, they spent a few hours in the arcade and then decided to grab a bite to eat. Around 7 p.m., Karen, the girl's mother, who was distributing leaflets in front of an Indian restaurant that day, saw her daughters walking on the opposite side of the street. At that moment, Charlene and Becky were drinking milkshakes. When the girls saw their mother, they immediately crossed the street and talked to her about their plans for the rest of the evening. Becky announced that she wanted to go home, while Charlene wanted to meet up with her friends Natalie and Ashley. Karen repeatedly reminded her youngest daughter to come home at the agreed time of 10 p.m. Obviously, she placed great importance on this, as Charlene did not always adhere to the set return time. After a while, Karen went with her daughter to the phone booth to call her friends. They waited until the friends arrived, whereupon Charlene hugged her mother and went with them to the amusement center. That was the last time Karen saw her youngest daughter. Charlene met up with another friend around 10:30 p.m. and they went to a bar called Carousel on the North Promenade of Blackpool. Later, they returned to the city center. Around 11 p.m., the friend left Charlene alone in the area between Talbot Road and Abingdon Street. From that point on, the girl disappeared without a trace. When Charlene did not come home at the agreed time, her parents initially thought it was another act of rebellion and went to bed calmly. When they woke up the next day and found that their daughter had not returned, they did not immediately raise the alarm, suspecting that Charlene might have stayed overnight at a friend's house. Later, when the girl still had not appeared, the Downs family contacted the police. They were told that a missing person report could only be filed after 48 hours. 2 days later, when Charlene still had not returned, Karen contacted the police again. She said she had a strong premonition that her daughter would not be coming home. That afternoon, Karen filed a formal missing person report. Initially, the police considered Charlene's disappearance a voluntary departure from home. It seemed like a typical teenage rebellion, where a child does not return home to test the boundaries set by parents and their own capabilities. Nevertheless, the police reluctantly asked Karen to describe her daughter's appearance and clothing. According to her mother, Charlene was wearing black jeans with a golden eagle on the front, a dark t-shirt with a white diamond pattern, and high black shoes that day. She might also have been wearing a white sweater, but Karen was not sure about that. By the time the police began their investigation, a lot of time had passed. Despite a thorough search of the neighborhood, neither Charlene herself nor her belongings could be found. The police questioned Charlene's friends with whom she had been on the day of her disappearance and found out that the girl had last been seen around 11 p.m. The law enforcement officers also examined video recordings. One of the recordings shows a girl resembling Charlene around 9 p.m. at the intersection of Dixon Road and North Pier. She was accompanied by a woman with blonde hair and a long coat. However, this piece of evidence did not provide any conclusive clues and did not help in the search. Furthermore, this video was recorded around 9 p.m. and Charlene was last seen around 11 p.m. However, since the police had no other leads, this material was kept as possible evidence. Days turned into weeks, but information about Charlene's possible whereabouts never surfaced. At some point, Karen, the girl's mother, noticed that none of the national, or at least local, newspapers had reported on her daughter's disappearance. There were also no pictures of Charlene on the street indicating her disappearance. In search of support, Karen approached representatives of a local newspaper to ask them to publish her daughter's story. The editorial office then informed her that they had learned about the case some time ago and apologized for not reporting on it sooner. They said the police had asked them not to publicize the disappearance because they assumed it was a voluntary departure from home and not an abduction. These words threw Karen and Bob Downs into a state of agitation. They could not understand why the police officers did not inform them that they still considered the case a voluntary runaway. Furthermore, it was a real mystery to Karen and Bob why the police officers had even contacted the newspaper representatives and asked them not to publish the story. Obviously, the Downs were disappointed, perhaps even shocked, that the police action might have deprived Charlene of the chance to be found in the first days of her disappearance. If the case had been made public, someone might have been able to provide important information or at least a lead. However, in the absolute silence and information vacuum, nothing significant could be found out. Moreover, Charlene's parents were annoyed that the authorities relied on their own assumptions without any reason to believe their daughter had run away from home. Nevertheless, the teenager's relatives managed to attract media attention. However, they believe that many people could have passed on valuable information if Charlene's story had been published in the first days after her disappearance. Unfortunately, by that time, several weeks had already passed. And although the information about the girl's disappearance eventually made it into all newspapers and even television, there was no indication that Charlene would be found alive and unharmed. It was clear to everyone that in such situations, the first hours are crucial for finding clues or leads. However, the parents' fears that no one would come forward proved to be premature. After Charlene's story became known in the local news, the police literally received hundreds of possible leads. These included reports that the girl had allegedly been seen sleeping by the roadside or wandering around the shopping mall. Some eyewitnesses claimed to have seen Charlene dead on railway tracks. The police checked most of these leads, but they all turned out to be false. None of them concerned Charlene. Although the information was not made public, the authorities questioned all members of Charlene's family. Particular attention was paid to the girl's father, Bob Downs, who was initially considered one of the main suspects. According to rumors, Bob was a hot-tempered man prone to alcohol consumption. For this reason, he could not provide precise information about his whereabouts at the time of his daughter's disappearance. However, this was not the only reason for suspicion. The police officers considered Bob a repulsive person, and some even suspected that he had abused his daughters. In their opinion, Bob was a man capable of anything and even exchanged his family for money to finance his addiction. During a search of the Downs family home, women's underwear and red nail polish were also found among Bob's personal belongings. The police concluded that this evidence supported the theory that Bob solicited his children for sexual intercourse. However, as the investigation took a serious turn, this theory fell apart. The authorities still considered Bob a tyrant who beat his wife and children. However, it turned out that Bob was undergoing psychological treatment for a gender identity disorder. His big secret was that he dressed as a woman and called himself Martina when he was home alone. When the police officers began to question Bob about his preferences, his mood changed dramatically and he became more aggressive. At times, he became hysterical. This behavior led social services to have serious concerns about the children's welfare. Over time, Charlene's case made no progress and one police theory after another burst at the seams. But it wasn't just the police who had difficulties. The Downs family also began to break apart. In the summer of 2004, a social worker visited them for the first time to get an idea of the family's situation. During the conversation, Bob could not control himself and threw a potato at the social worker. Sometime after that, Robert Jr. was temporarily isolated from his father because it was thought he might pose a threat. The boy was eventually returned to his parents' care. The police suspicions against Bob never led to charges as there was no conclusive evidence. Nevertheless, the case remained open and the police looked for new ways to advance the investigation. They soon remembered that there was an organization in the Blackpool underworld involved in the exploitation of minors. The authorities believed that Charlene, like dozens of other girls her age, might have come into contact with members of this criminal organization. It was suspected that they operated out of fast food restaurants. This theory was supported by information about the dysfunctional Downs family. According to social services reports, Charlene frequently had contact with individuals who had been convicted of indecent assault. Most importantly, however, they were all friends or acquaintances of her parents. The Downs family, however, denied that such people were part of their circle of friends. The police investigation involved many suspects. However, the police officers focused on a specific theory. Charlene was killed by someone who worked in a fast food restaurant in an area known as Pakistan Alley. In the following months, no new leads emerged in Charlene's case, and it seemed that the case would be closed. However, in March 2006, a local businessman named David Cassidy came forward to the police with information that changed the course of the investigation. He claimed he had been told that Charlene had been murdered by two people connected to a fast food restaurant. David immediately named names. One of them was Iyad al-Batiki, the owner of Mr. G. Tikes. The other was Mohammed Revesi, his friend and business partner. Upon receiving this information, the police immediately took action and installed listening devices in Mohammed's house and car. These devices were in operation for 4 weeks, after which the recordings were transcribed. The final report indicated that the suspects frequently recalled killing a young girl and disposing of her remains. Consequently, in 2007, Iyad al-Batiki, the owner of Mr. G. Tikes, was charged with Charlene's murder, and his business partner Mohammed was charged with disposing of her remains. Iyad was also accused of enticing Charlene into intimacy shortly before her death. The trial began in March of that year and lasted several months. The jurors learned that Charlene was the victim of a criminal organization involved in the illegal exploitation of minors. It was also alleged that one of the defendants had forced her into an intimate relationship before her murder. Despite these accusations, the men denied the charges. However, the prosecutor presented a rather graphic description of the alleged events, stating that Charlene's body had been dismembered, minced, and processed into a mixture used for kebabs. However, the prosecution had no physical evidence linking the defendants to Charlene. Her body was never found. Furthermore, the victim was not mentioned by name in the files. In light of this, the jurors were unable to decide whether the men were guilty. A retrial was scheduled for 2008, but during preparations, significant problems with the quality of the audio recordings were identified. There was no clear information about what these issues were, but it was suspected that the person responsible for transcribing the recordings might have drawn incorrect conclusions about the nature of the conversation. Since the audio recordings could no longer be used as evidence in court, the prosecution was unable to present anything coherent, and both men were released. Furthermore, both Iyad and Mohammed received moral compensation of £250,000 each, equivalent to about $314,000, for wrongful imprisonment and trial. Iyad subsequently had several run-ins with the law, all involving his possible involvement in offenses against the sexual integrity of minors. However, in each of these cases, he was eventually acquitted. As previously mentioned, the relationship between the Downs couple could hardly be described as good. Further proof of this came in April 2008, just a week after the failed retrial. During an argument, Karen attacked her husband with a knife. Since the injuries were minor, Bob declined to press charges against his wife, stating that she had suffered a nervous breakdown because she was unable to obtain justice for her daughter. In the past, Charlene's parents had accepted the prosecution's version, as devastating as it was. However, when they had to watch Charlene's alleged murderers go free and even receive compensation, their frustration reached incredible levels. Since the suspects were of Jordanian and Iranian descent, a true fire of xenophobia was ignited in Blackpool. The alleged impunity of the perpetrators became a welcome pretext for representatives of local far-right groups. They organized demonstrations and fueled existing tensions by emphasizing that Charlene had not received justice. In October 2009, it was announced that the Independent Police Complaints Commission had begun to review the material collected as part of the investigation into Charlene's case. It was particularly interested in the transcripts of the audio recordings. According to the commission's representatives, the police investigation was not only ineffective but also unprofessional. As a result, based on all identified violations, 7 police officers were subjected to disciplinary action. Meanwhile, one of Charlene's older sisters, Emma, who was 24 at the time, was put on trial for a racist attack on a young man. The man she had beaten up was named Tariq and was the younger brother of the already known Iyad, the man previously accused of being involved in Charlene's disappearance. On the first day of the trial, Emma pleaded guilty to assault. However, she also stated that her actions were not motivated by racial prejudice, but by the fact that her sister's possible murderer had not been punished. The court eventually accepted Emma's guilty plea for common assault, which did not result in a prison sentence. In 2009, another dispute involving a member of the Downs family occurred, leading to another trial. This time, Charlene's younger brother Robert admitted in court that he had attacked Mohammed, the man previously accused of disposing of the remains. Sometime later that year, however, the Downs family received an official warning from the police for distributing leaflets claiming that Iyad and Mohammed were involved in Charlene's disappearance. However, the real information bomb exploded in 2014 when the Times published allegations against Karen and Bob. Representatives of the newspaper reported on leaked documents claiming that the social services and the West Midlands police had initiated a joint investigation into the Downs couple. This concerned events from 1998, shortly before the family moved to Blackpool. It was reported that a man previously convicted of indecent assault on underage girls was a regular guest at the Downs house. Another shocking revelation made by the newspaper staff was that the Downs move occurred shortly after Charlene's visit to a hospital in the West Midlands. The Times report also mentioned several men who appeared at the family home after meeting Bob in a local pub. One of them referred to Charlene as his girlfriend, while another admitted to paying the girl's father for intimacy with her. All this information brought the Downs family into the public eye, although it did not prove they had anything to do with their daughter's disappearance. After all this, the investigation into the case was closed. New details only emerged in August 2017 when police officers arrested a 51-year-old man named Nigel Lloyd. The authorities found it strange that Nigel had suddenly given up his business and moved from Blackpool to Preston around the same time the teenage girl disappeared. However, after 48 hours of interrogation, the man was released because the police officers simply had no conclusive evidence to hold him. Sometime after that, Karen published a book that was a kind of response to the article published in the Times. In her book, she tried to explain that she and Bob had their own circle of friends like everyone else, and that sometimes one of them stayed overnight at their house. This was mostly the case when they had been drinking. Karen also said that she had never vetted the people Bob brought home, as she felt it was unnecessary since they were locals. In any case, Karen believed that these people had no contact with Charlene or the other children. The truth, however, was that by the time this book was published, it was already too late. The public, in the broadest sense of the word, had already formed its own opinion about the situation in the Downs house. While at the beginning of the investigation, almost everyone in the community sympathized with Charlene's parents, the more unpleasant details about their lives came to light. the more they were held responsible for what happened. But as with all other hypotheses that emerged during the investigation, neither the authorities nor anyone else had any evidence to support these suspicions. Nevertheless, accusations against Charlene's parents continued to appear in the media. They mainly concerned their alleged connection to individuals who had been convicted of offenses against minors in the past. The same accusations came to light in a three-part documentary titled The Murder of Charlene Downs, released in 2019. In it, Karen was asked if she allowed men with, to put it mildly, questionable pasts into her home. The woman admitted that one of the guests told her one day that he had feelings for Charlene. She immediately rebuked him, and after that he never said anything like that again. Bob was also questioned about the men who had stayed overnight at his house. He stated that he had never seen the children interact with any of the guests. After watching this documentary, it became clear to me that Karen and Bob did not fit into the category of normal parents. Although their guilt in their daughter's disappearance was never proven, the vast majority of people following the case agreed that Charlene did not receive adequate parental care. She spent her short life in poverty. Her father's addiction, his psychological problems, and his relationships with strangers only worsened the situation and made it clear once again that Charlene, like the other Downs children, was constantly in danger. As recently as 2019, Rowan Crompton, a justice activist, took up the cause. She created a group on one of the social media platforms called Real Justice for Charlene Downs. Rowan also contacted a source who provided her with a series of official case files. While reviewing the documents, it became clear to her that many aspects of the investigation had never been reported in the media. In her opinion, it was clear from the beginning that Iyad and Mohammed had nothing to do with Charlene's disappearance, as the authorities had no direct evidence of their guilt. Furthermore, the few witness statements often contradicted each other. While Rowan conducted her own research, several more years passed. During this time, Robert, Charlene's brother, who was apparently severely depressed and suffering from addiction, died of an overdose of illegal substances. Although he started his own family, he could never cope with the loss caused by the disappearance and presumed death of his own sister. This became another tragedy for the Downs family. Remarkably, this time too, the public placed all the blame for what happened on them. Thanks for watching and take care. On an autumnal October afternoon in the year 2013, a young girl named Abigail Hernandez left school and was ready to go home. She had plans, dreams, and a promising life, but as evening fell, the shadows grew longer and Abigail did not arrive home. Calls from her mother went unanswered, and concern quickly turned into fear. What began as a normal day turned into her parents' worst nightmare. Their daughter seemed to have vanished without a trace. The search for Abigail raised more questions than answers, leaving the community in suspense as they tried to unravel the eerie mystery of what had truly happened to her that day. All parents, in an effort to protect their children, explained that strangers should not be trusted, not engaged in conversation, let alone agree to go anywhere or get into their car. These conversations, as well as the explanation of the reasons for such measures and the potential consequences. The story of Abigail Hernandez, an American schoolgirl, is a vivid example of what can happen when one is careless for a moment and trusts a person who seems friendly and helpful. She hoped a kind stranger would simply drive her home, but instead she found herself in the hands of a real monster. Abigail Hernandez, better known as Abby, was born on October 12, 1998 in Manchester, New Hampshire. She was the youngest daughter in the family of Ruben and Senia Hernandez and grew up with her older sister, Sarah, with whom she developed a close relationship. Abby's mother worked as a nurse at the local hospital while her father worked in commerce. The Hernandez family was warm and prosperous, but when Abby was still a teenager, her parents decided to divorce. Her father subsequently remarried and started a new family, while the two daughters remained with their mother. Since childhood, Abby proved to be an active and sociable child. She was surrounded by friends, easily found new hobbies, and explored them with enthusiasm. Abby was passionate about sports, drew well, took photographs, read a lot, and learned foreign languages, which came easily to her. Around the age of 12, Abby joined a hiking club and started camping and mountaineering. She fell in love with the mountains and learned to put the lessons of survival in nature into practice. No wonder, as the picturesque landscapes of New Hampshire, with its forests, rivers, and mountains, are the perfect setting for tourism and adventure, attracting extreme sports enthusiasts from all over the country. The summer of 2013 was an eventful one for Abby. When she returned to school in September, she looked forward to telling her friends about her summer adventures, the places she had visited, and her new achievements. At this time, the 14-year-old girl had started a romantic relationship with Jimmy, a student at her school who was 1 year older. Xenia knew her daughter was dating this young man and had no objections to the relationship. In early October 2013, with the autumn holidays and Abby's 15th birthday approaching, she enthusiastically planned a mountain hike with the members of the hiking club she belonged to. She had received new hiking boots as a gift, which were somewhat expensive, so she decided to wear them to school as well. On October 9th, Abby went to class as usual. She planned to go to the park after school and promised her mother she wouldn't be late. However, when her daughter had still not come home by 5 p.m., Xenia called her, but her phone was turned off. The mother worried, but thought maybe her daughter's phone battery had died and she was still out late with friends. A few hours later, when there was still no word, Xenia panicked. She called her daughter's friends and teachers to find out when Abby had left school and who she might have left with. She was told that Abby left right after class and said goodbye to her friends at the bus stop, where they boarded the school bus while Abby decided to walk home. Abby didn't stop by her friends' houses, nor did she call anyone. Even Jimmy, whom she was supposed to meet, couldn't reach her. A frightened Xenia went straight to the police with her eldest daughter, Sarah, and reported her missing. Since Abby was still a minor, the search began immediately. It turned out that her phone's signal had been lost about 1.5 kilometers from the house. The news of the missing schoolgirl spread quickly on social media. Flyers with her photo, a description of her clothing, and a phone number to call if any information was found were printed. The next morning, the missing person report was broadcast on the 7 o'clock news. Hundreds of police officers, volunteers, and local residents participated in the search for Abby. They combed through parks, vacant lots, bodies of water, and abandoned buildings. The police checked various leads, looked for witnesses, and spoke with the girl's family and friends, but without success. Investigators tried to find out if Abby had any enemies or unwanted, overly persistent admirers. However, those who knew her claimed she was always friendly and outgoing and enjoyed being in company. She had no conflicts with others, and none of her friends noticed anyone following her or trying to harm her. The first person investigators questioned was Jimmy, Abby's boyfriend, who immediately became a suspect. They tried to determine if there were any conflicts or resentments between the two that could have been a reason for harm, but Jimmy was shocked and didn't understand why he was suspected. He was truly baffled how anyone could think he would harm the girl he loved. Jimmy had a watertight alibi for the time of Abby's disappearance, confirmed by his family, teachers, and friends. His day was packed: classes, training, school band practice, and his grandfather's birthday party, which he did not miss. Jimmy cooperated willingly with the investigation, telling the police everything he knew, but it didn't help advance the investigation. The schoolgirl simply vanished into thin air. For a long time, there wasn't a single clue or even a hint as to which direction the investigation should go. It was clear to the investigators that the chances of finding her alive were approaching zero, but her family did not give up hope. About a month and a half after Abby's disappearance, her mother discovered a strange letter in her mailbox. The author was her missing daughter. In this message, the girl apologized for her actions and assured her that she was well, healthy, and safe. She wrote that she loved her mother and Sarah, but could not reveal exactly where she was now. The letter ended with the cryptic and concise sentence, "Dreams come true." A graphological analysis confirmed the letter's authenticity. The text was indeed written by Abby and dated early November, meaning she was most likely still alive. However, her whereabouts and the real reason for her disappearance remained a mystery. Why couldn't she reveal where she was? Perhaps she was afraid of something or someone, or maybe she was forced to write this message. Soon, the theory emerged that Abby had left home of her own accord, but after seeing the reports about her disappearance, decided to let her family know she was still alive. One hypothesis was that she had become pregnant and decided to run away with the father of the unborn child, fearing the family's anger and condemnation. However, this theory only provoked outrage from the Hernandez family. Sarah confidently stated that if her younger sister were really expecting a child, she would have been the first to know, as there had never been secrets between them. Furthermore, Abby's only boyfriend had been Jimmy, and according to his own words, he and Abby had never been intimate, meaning both remained innocent. Friends of the missing girl also confirmed that Abby wasn't dating anyone besides Jimmy and had never mentioned any other preference. Her best friend, Miranda, insisted that Abigail couldn't have been pregnant and wouldn't have abandoned her family after causing her mother and older sister so much pain. Besides, she had left all her documents, personal savings, and valuables at home. Investigators examined the letter for clues that might indicate her whereabouts, but found no coded messages or cries for help. Nevertheless, the case attracted the interest of the FBI, which classified it as a kidnapping. It was suspected that Abby was being held forcibly and had written the letter under duress, unable to specify her location, and this suspicion turned out to be correct. The kidnapper and his victim were only a few dozen kilometers from the Hernandez house. Furthermore, since Abigail's disappearance, the police had driven past the perpetrator's home several times but found nothing suspicious. The kidnapper himself was desperate, trying to decide what to do next with his captive. Who is Nathaniel Kibbe? It's time to reveal the kidnapper's identity. Nathaniel, or simply Nate Kibbe, was born on July 15, 1980 in the same town as Abby. There is little information about his family, but according to some reports, his mother raised him alone and he never knew his father. During his school years, Nate was known as a real troublemaker and bully. He constantly got into fights and conflicts with others. He even had a list of people he wanted to hurt or beat up. Even in childhood, he showed aggression and cruelty, which is why his classmates tried to stay away from him and the teachers couldn't handle him. As a teenager, Kibbe repeatedly came onto the police's radar for various offenses. He was a member of a gang which he was proud of and had a particular passion for firearms, about which he was very knowledgeable. He had numerous convictions for fights involving serious bodily harm, possession of illegal substances, and petty theft. However, he always managed to get away with administrative penalties. Interesting fact, Nate attended the same school as Abby, but due to the age difference, their paths never crossed, either inside or outside of school. After graduation, Nate Kibbe seemed to develop a new attitude and decided to turn away from crime. He got a job at one of the local companies, where his colleagues and management generally spoke positively about him. But a few years later, after a serious conflict with a union member, Nate quit, moved to the suburbs, and settled in a questionable locality in a trailer park. Neighbors considered him strange and tried to avoid interacting with this short-tempered and aggressive man. In 2011, when Kibbe was in his early 30s, he began dating a 13-year-old girl with whom he actually lived. She came from a broken family, had run away from home, and lived in Kibbe's trailer. He didn't even hide their relationship, introducing the schoolgirl as his girlfriend. Astonishingly, these events went unpunished for him. In the spring of 2013, Nate Kibbe made his first kidnapping attempt. Fortunately, his plan failed. He attacked a 15-year-old girl at a bus stop near an educational institution, trying to force her into his car. She resisted desperately, screamed, and called for help. Passers-by ran towards the noise, and the perpetrator hastily left the scene. Despite the statements of the victim and eyewitnesses, the case was soon closed and did not go to court. No one considered Kibbe a real threat. Now, back to the day of Abigail's disappearance. October 9, 2013. On the eve of her 15th birthday, she had received a new pair of hiking boots that were a little too tight. Abby decided to wear the shoes to school. By the end of class, her feet started to hurt, but she still decided to walk home. Every step was painful, and it was still about 1.5 kilometers to her house. At that moment, an old pickup truck pulled up beside her, driven by Nathaniel. The smiling man offered her a ride anywhere, but Abby declined. The stranger, however, was persistent and drove slowly alongside her, not leaving her alone. Nate noticed the girl was limping and asked what was wrong. Abby sighed and admitted that her new shoes were pinching her feet. Hearing this, Kibbe opened the passenger door and offered her a ride. She hesitated but finally agreed. Abby thought no danger could come from this friendly man, but she was gravely mistaken. Nate chatted casually with her during the drive, trying to put her at ease, which he succeeded in doing. Abby felt safe, answered his questions, and laughed at his jokes. At some point, Kibbe announced he needed to stop at a hardware store to pick up repair materials. As they pulled into the dark parking lot, Abby became visibly nervous. She said it was only a short way to her house and that she could easily walk it, but noticing the driver's menacing look, she decided to unbuckle her seatbelt and jump out of the car. Nate anticipated her move, grabbed her clothing with one hand, and quickly retrieved a pistol from the glove compartment with the other. He pointed the gun directly at the terrified young girl's face, threatening to kill her if she tried to resist. Then the kidnapper bound her hands and feet with cable ties and pulled a baseball cap over her head so she couldn't see the road or recognize where she was being taken. He soon noticed, however, that Abby slightly moved the cap so she could see what was happening. This angered him, and he used the stun gun, giving Abby an electric shock that rendered her unconscious. Abby woke up in a cramped and stuffy, windowless space. As it later turned out, it was a small shipping container belonging to Nathaniel, parked in a trailer park area slightly further away amidst dense tree cover. Soon, the kidnapper himself appeared, holding a roll of duct tape and a motorcycle helmet in his hand. He taped her mouth and eyes shut, then pulled the helmet over her head, ensuring the victim was completely immobilized and helpless. Then he tore her clothes off and committed acts of violence. Nate forced her into intimate acts almost daily to live out his most perverse fantasies. Besides physical violence, Nate also actively exerted psychological pressure. He threatened to kill her family if she dared to escape or call for help. At the same time, he promised to let her go if she behaved calmly and didn't cause him any problems. In the first few days, Abby was in a state of shock and essentially wanted to give up on life. But gradually, she realized he didn't intend to kill her, at least not yet. Abby then decided to build an emotional connection with her kidnapper to convince him to let her go. She tried to persuade him that she didn't judge him, that everyone can make mistakes, and that she wouldn't go to the police if he released her. Nate, however, was an extremely unpredictable person, and any little thing could trigger a fit of rage in him, turning him into a true monster. Sometimes he showed a certain tenderness towards his captive, but more often he was cruel and resorted to moral and physical violence. The container where Nate held Abigail was well soundproofed. When they learned about the large-scale search for the missing girl, Nate came up with the idea of making her write a letter to her mother to assure her family she was okay and to prompt them to call off the search. Abigail wrote several letters at Nate's dictation, each time trying to include a clue about her location, but the man noticed these attempts and punished her severely. Eventually, she wrote the letter exactly as he demanded to avoid further abuse. After about a year, Nathaniel began to trust Abby so much that he allowed her to help him produce counterfeit money. Sometimes he let her sleep in the trailer and even assigned her the responsibility of preparing meals. Despite this trust, he continued to abuse her, mistreat her, and demand intimacy with her. He forced her to call him master and never revealed his real name. Gradually, Abigail managed to build some kind of relationship with him, and one day, Nate even agreed to bring her books and magazines. On one of the pages, the girl saw the name Nathaniel Kibbe, but she wasn't sure if it was his real name, so she decided to risk it. One day, she addressed him using his first name to gauge his reaction. To her surprise, he just rolled his eyes, sighed, and calmly asked how she knew his name. Abby answered honestly that she had seen it in a book. Well, the man just smirked and said nothing. Abigail spent most of her time in the soundproof container. She couldn't hear what was happening outside and was unaware that police officers had once passed just a few meters away from her. As Nate had once again broken the law, he decided to cooperate with the investigation and confess to illegal gun possession. They came to search his place, examined the trailer, but did not approach the container. No one even thought of looking there. Thanks to his cooperation with the police, Kibbe got away with just a fine and the confiscation of the weapon. It seemed incredible, but after all his atrocities, he was never brought to trial. It seemed as though luck was always on his side, and he himself appeared to believe in his impunity. He had no intention of letting Abby go, but perhaps he was slowly getting bored with her. In July 2014, Nathaniel met a woman named Lorraine in a bar. After a brief acquaintance, he invited her to his trailer, where they had an intimate relationship. The next day, Lorraine, who complained about lack of money and difficulties paying her rent, received $250 bills from him. However, she soon discovered it was counterfeit money and angrily called Kibbe, saying she had told the police where she got the bills and that he should expect a visit from them. This phone call was a turning point in Abigail's fate. On July 20th, the kidnapper suddenly gave her all her personal belongings, tied her hands, put her in the passenger seat of his car, and pulled a baseball cap over her face. Abby didn't understand what was happening and feared her final hour had come. But Nate stopped on a country road, untied her, and said, "Get out and don't you dare go to the police." Then he got into his car and sped away. Abigail couldn't believe this was really happening. She simply walked along the road until she saw a signpost and realized it was only a short distance to her house. The girl covered the distance in a couple of hours, constantly looking back and fearing the kidnapper would return. But there was no sign of him. The Hernandez family had a surveillance camera at the front door which recorded the moment Abby came through the door. She heard her mother talking on the phone and called out loudly for her. The stunned woman dropped her mobile phone and rushed to the doorway. Mother and daughter hugged and cried for a long time, unable to believe that this nightmare was finally over and they were together again. Abigail noticed how much her mother had changed. She had aged significantly and become gaunt in recent months. Her mother began to question her daughter about where she had been and what had happened to her, suggesting they go to the police immediately. Abigail, remembering the kidnapper's threats, decided, however, not to betray him and said she didn't know who had kidnapped her or where she had been held. She also didn't give the police his name, fearing Nate might pursue her or her loved ones. The girl spent the next week in uncertainty, not knowing what to do next. Finally, she decided to tell her mother the truth. Her mother persuaded her again to go to the police, explaining that the perpetrator must be punished for his actions. Besides, neither Abigail nor her family could feel safe as long as Kibbe was free. On July 27, 2014, Abigail named the kidnapper and provided the make and license plate of his car. The man was arrested the very next day and, to everyone's surprise, offered no resistance, although he completely denied his guilt. However, in his trailer, as well as in the container which was finally examined, numerous pieces of evidence were found indicating that Abby had been held there for a long period and brutally abused. Hair, blood traces, sweat stains, and broken fingernails of the victim were found, Although Kibbe's guilt was obvious, his defense attorney applied for bail release as early as August. The judge granted the request, sparking great public outrage and shock. However, on the same day, a restraining order was issued prohibiting Kibbe from approaching the Hernandez family or attempting to contact them. The trial against Nathaniel Kibbe began in December 2014 and lasted until May 2015. In an attempt to mitigate his sentence, the defendant agreed to a plea deal and pleaded guilty to his crimes. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole only after 45 years. Abigail gave a speech in court, saying she had forgiven her kidnapper and through the terrible experience learned to appreciate life and every minute spent with loved ones more. Her mother also spoke, saying she hated him from the bottom of her heart but was simultaneously grateful that he had kept her daughter alive and allowed her to return home. This story shows how Abigail's incredible courage and her mother's support helped bring the kidnapper to account and ensure he was punished. Despite the horror she experienced, Abby was able to forgive her tormentor and develop a new understanding of the value of life. The complicated trial ended with a well-deserved verdict, allowing the Hernandez family to finally feel safe. Thank you for watching and take care of yourselves.